Buon pomeriggio a tutti. Good afternoon, Masa El Cairo. Today we have the first international talk of our project, Art Rethinks Transformation. And before introducing our colleagues, our guests, I want just to say that it's for me a very special pleasure to discuss about Mediterranean. It was a place that I was usual to visit many times in my life, from Morocco to Middle East. And today we will we have this talk about experiments in public space across the Mediterranean. The focus will be public space, a human relationship inside the public space, and power, and how all these things have been linked with the colonial legacies. The discussion about Mediterranean is very large. We have to think that when we say Mediterranean, we include the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. So it is very difficult to imagine the Mediterranean as a unique thing. We have to consider that Mediterranean is a very large place with very different cultures, and we have only to create a relationship between this culture and create good links to know better each other and to stay together, and also to plan a common vision for the future development in this moment that is very difficult for all the world. I don't want to take time, as I know that each colleague has a lot of things to say to us. And first of all, I want to introduce Shourideh Molavi. Shourideh was the person that proposed me to include this project in the art project, and together with Andrea Cusumano, our artistic director, we discussed a lot how to implement it. It's very difficult to present Shuri. She worked a lot in the Middle East. She is teaching at Basel University. She is responsible for Middle East for forensic architecture. I say it's strange because I met her during Manifesta 12 here in Palermo with a very nice project. And she was at that time a teacher at Doha University. I knew that she's Iranian. Then I was in touch with her from Stockholm. Now I think she's in Stockholm. Then she submitted another project that we will develop next year here in Palermo as Basel University. So it's very complicated, but I know that every time she tried to come to Palermo and share with us all the activities that she implement around the world. So, Shuri, I would like that you could introduce this panel and tell us which is the reason why you put together Palermo, Gaza, and Cairo. Please.
Okay, thank you, Roberto, for the very kind and detailed introduction. Thank you also to Carla and to Andrea for organizing this, for having us. So the people on this panel are three of my friends and people that I have collaborated with in what I counted are 4 countries, doing various political, educational, artistic types of interventions and works in different spaces, whether they're colonial or conflict or urban spaces. And the idea that we had after Manifesta was a way to try to keep the connection to the city of Palermo in a way that takes the invitation of the city of Palermo seriously, which is an invitation to decolonize its own gaze and to remove sort of its focus from the global north to more of the Mediterranean, Middle East, and the African continent. And the people on this panel, we all work from our specific contexts, but we hope to address a range of issues that we think are interrelated and extremely timely now, which is the notion of public space, how public space is changing, how it's contested, how it's denied and restricted in some contexts, and how that interacts with the daily lived practices and experiences of the populations in the spaces with whom we work and in the spaces that many of us live. The way that public space changes also affects the types of resistances that people mobilize. So we wanted to build a panel that speaks to various points in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East that can speak within their own context, but also draw connections across the dividing borders in an attempt to start to demilitarize this area known as the Mediterranean. And a lot of the information that we'll share with you and the experiences and practices will give you a sense of how public spaces develop over long periods of times in our context, but also very much where they stand in their present COVID-19 pandemic context. So in the present context of closures, how these public spaces have changed. So the first speaker that we have is Jens Haendeler, who's a friend of mine with whom I have taught and worked and gotten into a lot of trouble with. He's an instructor in urban studies in Palestine, in Abu Dis, at Al-Quds University and the Bard College there. The second speaker is Sergio Sanna. And Sergio, here I have to look a bit at your biography. Has studied architecture in Palermo, and then landscape architecture as well. And the reason that I was very much drawn to Sergio's work is because of the visual focus that he has, the emphasis on the politics of space, the denial of space, the importance of terrains and landscapes in building people's relationships to the city. Sergio's also a co-founder of Ground Action and an adjunct professor in urban and territorial interventions. I will speak after Sergio on the context of Gaza, where I have worked for a number of years. And following me will be Iman Hamam, who is a very good friend and with whom I've had the pleasure of teaching both in Doha and in Cairo. Iman also joined us for our week of unlearning in Palermo last year, along also with Jens, where we also met Sergio. So it's a very tight-knit group. And Iman teaches rhetoric and composition at the American University of Cairo. She looks at the role of memorialization in the Egyptian public sphere and in contemporary Egypt. And her work looks a lot at the role of Egyptian films, museums, and the lived architecture and infrastructure in shaping the way that people resist and understand themselves. So I hope I did all of you justice, but I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also looking forward to the discussions that will follow. Thank you.
For this introduction, and I ask to Jens to start with the first speech, please.
Sure, thank you. Okay. Allow me 1 second to share my screen.
We met last year, and it was easier to discuss together. Now we have to follow this rule. Please.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so I believe you should see my screen on the stream. Right. Thank you, Roberto, for bringing us here. Thank you, Carla, also, who was part of organizing the talk. And then also thank you, Shourideh, for throwing us in here together. It's a great pleasure to kind of think and work together. What I have brought today is a kind of 10-minute journey across one of these projects that we did in public space, in quotation marks. Okay, and I will kind of try to show you some of these examples that where we looked at public space, we performed in public space, and also try to tell you what we've learned from the activity of conducting projects or experiments, as you call them, in public space. The journey on this specific project, which is called Atlas Al-Ain, is or began in 2018 in the summer, when a colleague of mine, Gary English, and I were driving down a settler road near Jerusalem, just north of Bethlehem. And we're driving it basically, well, not too often, but every few months. And one day, what we saw was the construction of a new checkpoint. There was already one checkpoint, which we have known and which we're kind of used to, and being privileged as foreigners in a settler colonial context, and also white males, there was nothing to fear. But it kind of surprised us that then, to the west of that checkpoint, a second checkpoint emerged under construction. And we kind of got interested in this second checkpoint and why it would emerge so close to the other, and started to look at the landscape more closely. The landscape that ran both sides of that road, which we traversed on, was also parallel to the 1948 Green Line, which was drawn in 48 by an act of state formation, and kind of dissected the landscape of Al-Walaja, which is the landscape you see on the right-hand side in this square, into two parts. The north, which would be known as 48, right? And the south, which is now the West Bank. We kind of contextualized the second checkpoint within the overall militarized infrastructure that was present in that space. So drawn on that little map on the right-hand side is now the security wall, which emerged over the past 2 decades and surrounds the village of New Al-Walaja. And what we witnessed, kind of in parallel to the emergence of the checkpoint, is also the transformation of Ain al-Hania, the spring, one of the 3 remaining springs of Al-Walaja. Formerly, there were 24 springs in the Al-Walaja landscape, but after that dissection of the landscape into 2 parts, 48 and the West Bank, only 3 springs remained. And one of those remaining springs had then also been redeveloped into what the Israeli state would call a public park. Interestingly, as that space was transformed into a public park, access to that park for Palestinians was removed. The spring has long been at the center of village life in Al-Walaja and had a kind of very important position within the social construct of that village, as we will see in a few slides. But as that park was declared public space, it became it became public for the exclusive Jewish Israeli public. And even access for farmers, for Palestinians, even for those who have blue IDs. So the Palestinian identity card system is divided into different categories, and even privilege is the wrong word, but even the most privileged, relative privileged category of these identities was barred access to that spring on a regular basis. Okay. And one of the things we tried to do is, this is one of the exhibits that we kind of collected during that project, was to look at the history of that place and that landscape. And one thing we realized is that that landscape was really divided into 2 parts, right? So the landscape of Al-Walaja before 48, you can see on the left in color, and you can see some buildings in the center in brownish sandstone ochre. And post 48, that village was cut into 2, and the springs, which were positioned along that ravine, became haram. They became the people say they are haram. You cannot go there. It's forbidden to go there. And that was the case until 67, when some of those springs became accessible again to Palestinians. what we decided to do, and when I say we, I mean myself, some students. So it started as a summer course 3 years ago, and then has been kind of continued with graduates. Some of those who have been most actively involved are Omar Hamidat, Savannah Mjali, Diana Mjali, Hadir Radaide, Wishdan Radaide, and Nada Al-Saman, and most importantly, also the people of Al-Walaja. So we went to villages, and what we did is we collected, this is what you can see on these photos, we collected a kind of performative art atlas of the village, of the landscape, of the histories of the springs. And everything that got into our hands, whether it's legal documents that point to legal cases or land ownership in this area, whether it's old aerial photographs like the one you saw before, poems, books, interviews, histories, all of this we kind of collated into this performative object, which we call Atlas Al-Ain. But it was more than a collection of objects. It was a kind of lived space, okay? So it was this kind of collection of knowledge, of memories that we could take around and then assemble around again and again, and kind of let it grow. Sometimes we would look at maps and discuss memories of springs, discuss the history of springs, what is known about these places. And then sometimes we would also kind of unearth historic photos of these spaces. These two photos that you see here, they speak to the importance of the overall landscape of Al-Walaja before the Nakba. And what I would like to do is just read out one of those fragments that we collected as part of the workshops. What you see on the left-hand side is a historic photo, part of the American Colony Photography Department, and it shows a scenographic view of this photo. What you see is a scenographic view of the landscape of Al-Walaja, and that landscape was known as one of the contributors would tell us was known as the fruit basket of Jerusalem. It's an elderly Palestinian woman from Al-Walaja that would talk to us, and what she said was this: Al-Walaja, also known as the fruit basket of Jerusalem, it was a market hub for fruit and vegetables grown in this fruit basket. This collection of historic photos depicts women carrying baskets of fruits on their heads as they're on the way to the markets into the city of Jerusalem. Other photos show peasants loading the Jaffa-Jerusalem train line with their produce. At a time, the train would still stop in Al-Walaja and Batir. The springs and landscapes were the most important part of the region, and the histories and the photos speak to the fertile and arable landscapes. The fruit trees of Al-Walaja were our biggest pride. We grew almonds, figs, and oranges. For the foreigners that came to the spring, the land was only there to make religious rituals. That train line, which runs into the center, along the center of that valley, which was surrounding Al-Walaja, is no longer accessible to Palestinians from Al-Walaja, and it doesn't stop there. And what you see here is a short excerpt from a film by Rami Fararjeh, who kind of played in this short piece on the train, which doesn't stop anymore, but which used to stop. The atlas and its objects that we kind of collected, what they require is performativity. So they need to be performed in space. When we want to share memories, when we want to discuss past events and histories, when we want to share oral histories, this has to happen in some kind of space, right? Now, under the paradigm of Central colonialism, the public doesn't really exist as a category and is, of course, kind of righteously perceived as suspicious. And what we found during the course of our project was that the assemblies that we used for the Atlas and I took place in the olive groves, the springs, the gardens, the refugee camps, but really more often than anywhere else in the living rooms and in the front gardens of those villagers who participate in the performative Atlas. Would usually share tea and coffee, chai and kahwa, or a meal. And this sharing would open up a space to share common memories, poems. It would open up a space of translating. It would open up a space of performing the landscape together. And this space, which is kind of at the intersections of the common, the public, the private, and the landscape vis-a-vis the private house, would be called Al-Madafe. And Alessandro Petti and Sandy Hilal write about Al-Madafe. Al-Madafe is the part of the private house that has the potential to give different political and social meanings to the act of hospitality, and to turn private spaces, such as the living room, into social and political arenas. In Al-Walaja, where the public space, in quotation marks, is subject to military surveillance, as much as in all of occupied Palestine, of course, but where that is the case, Al-Madafe becomes a category of space at the margins of the private and the commons. And we use these marginal spaces as catalytical sites of memory production and sharing. One of those sharing sessions also took place in Dheisheh, in Mohammed al-Saifi's house. And he's also the photographer who has contributed to this event. And in Dheisheh, which is a refugee camp as opposed to a village, the categories of public and commons and what is supposed to be public and common are completely thrown together, thrown around again, right? And it doesn't translate one-to-one. And that's why I'm particularly grateful that Mohammed Saifi has contributed with photos. And I hope that we can touch on his work perhaps after our talk, when we have our conversation with the photographers. I'm going to stop here and give space to the others.
Thank you. Thank you, Jens. It's very interesting. I don't want to take time to the presentation, so I will say something at the end only. So, please, Sergio.
Yeah.
Can you start?
I'm gonna share my presentation. Just a few seconds. Okay. Can you see?
Yes.
Great. No. Okay. Thank you so much. I generally would like to thank all of you friends, and I'm really glad to be part of this panel. And since I'm the only local, I would like to welcome all the people who are listening to us from far. So somehow, thanks to this medium, we are able to connect a lot of people anyway. I have to say that I'm not an academic. I'm, as you said, I'm mainly a landscape architect, and who focused on social and special practices at one point. But suddenly I started working on my own research in order to both understand and support my own practice. I took literally the title of our panel to focus on a series of experiments, of a series of experiences. And if I had to choose a subtitle, it would be the conflict and violence hidden in the landscape. I believe, I mean, my personal definition of landscape is exactly shaping the land you belong to, and this could be understood as a form of resistance. This is an experience, a short workshop that we did 3 years ago with the local Institute of Architecture, and the main topic was the southeast coast of Palermo. We walked along almost 5 kilometers of this coast with this great view to end up to this spot that is basically a theater. What is it then? Is that both the coast, the theater, are a landfill, and this space is basically the memory of the Palermo sack that destroyed the original countryside of Palermo during some decades. What we did is very simple. We just decide to do the only thing that you can do in a theater that was never open to the public, to the city, to the citizens. We just used it. We just performed something in this theater, in this space. And during the last days, I even during the presentation of art project, I listened to this question: why do we use art and artistic intervention to transform our cities? And this is very, very curious at this point. That we need to use art to intervene, and moreover, why do we resort to other fields of knowledge to do it? In my case, since I'm an architect, the main question, it all comes from another question, that is how to produce real transformation immediately, so to give an answer to people or to spaces' needs. This I noticed that you like diagrams. Even on the website, there is a really nice diagram, and I like them too. So this diagram is a synthesis of my research focused on the operative workshop. Of course, I will not explain all the terms of the question. I was just to highlight that what I'm working on is a methodology that try to put together action and education. And I just want to recall your attention on background that you can find in the vertical axis on the top. Just just above operative workshop. Background, institutional vacuum, in other words, the institutional weakness, the lack of financial resources, and the red tape. The red tape refers to the rules and standard, the regulations that are often claimed to be excessive, to be rigid, and in general to the bureaucracy that prevents action and decision making. In other words, we are working on a change of a paradigm. We are switching to be designer to makers, to work on public space to social space. About it, I would like to just to explain that social space is not necessarily belong to the public, but is the space in which any action has a social meaning, even if the action is individual. And we are moving the center of gravity of the action from conception and execution, which are the typical phases of a project, to maintenance, use, the construction, demolition, and so on. This was before the pandemic, and now the rules changed, the situation changed. I believe that it's not up to us to discuss about the COVID and the pandemic, but it's our task to record somehow the facts and to reflect on the consequences. So very shortly, 3 facts that made me think a lot during the last month. The first, it's a short video. It's April 13, and in the foreground you can see the Zen neighborhood, and don't forget the mountain on the background. A police helicopter has been flying for 40 minutes to convince people on the rooftop to leave, to go back home, since we were in the lockdown. Beside the pandemic, it's important to say that specifically in this neighborhood, the buildings, the block have no terraces, have no balconies, proper balconies, and there is a lack of public space and facilities that is very, very strong and important. Just some days ago, in another neighborhood in the southeast, this new another similar situation, people on the rooftop, and the police had to intervene. We all remember the phenomenon of the balconies, small surfaces that suddenly turned into public extension of the private apartments. What this situation teached me is that this rebel action is also creative, and probably points out on a space that nobody, even the architects or the urban planners considered the only space of freedom and even that of reaction, of rebellion that those people had was the rooftop. Absolutely unsafe, of course, and not adapted. In any case, it was forbidden to meet people outside. This is April 29. Taking advantage of the emptiness of the city and the empty street, and those people organized an illegal horse race just in the city at 6:30 early in the morning. So a 2 kilometers ride, 2 horses, more than 30 people following on their motorcycles. I just try by looking the video posted on YouTube. I try to reconstruct the track they did, and so they started basically from the regional government building, and they ended up to the more or less to the highway, and all those institutions all along the track were closed, were temporarily closed due to the pandemic. Another fact, on this November the 8th, a group of hikers from Palermo posted a nice activity organized by the local Italian Alpine Club, and they organized this hiking in Monte Gallo, the mountain that we see in the helicopter video. It reminds me of another picture that Sandro Scalia took during during our preparation for the Pizzo Sella project for Manifesta. Because we decided to invite the local Club Alpino to share with us, to share the hiking and the path with us. So it surprised me a lot, and I thought that maybe all those efforts were important. It's so complicated to explain in very few words those projects, but what I see, since we are going to see Sandro's pictures later during the exhibition, is that I would like to express briefly the reason, and I will stop then. The reason because this project is so important for Palermo, because Rotor was in charge to do an installation in an abandoned and an unfinished house on the top of the hill. But suddenly the way to get to the house became, and the path became more important than the installation itself. And the house that ideally is at the end of the main axis that led the Palermo development during the last 3 centuries, offer us the opportunity to turn back, to look at the city, and to reflect on the space in which we are living every day, instead of point our finger on the monster on the hill. So this is the great opportunity that you have when you look at the place where you come from. And I don't know if I don't know. Tell me, Roberto, if I have some minutes more or.
Just 2 minutes if you want, no more, Sergio. We
Okay.
are late
So
already.
I would like to just to jump to the conclusion. During the last years, we worked a lot on this educational project involving students. In this case, for example, in Brancaccio, so the very southeast of Palermo, the very south of Palermo. And in this case, we involved more than 200 students. And what is crazy to me is that today it would be absolutely impossible to organize something that we are still proud of. So a panel like this is an opportunity to reflect and to find a new solution, to go ahead working on these topics in this situation. This is another project involving students and art as an instrument to defend a site, to defend a place, and to invite people to go in a construction site and to somehow to delete the bad memories of a neglected spaces, of a neglected space.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. The idea is that, in my opinion, it's easy. It's easier to educate, to teach young kids than to use Caterpillar to transform the city. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you. And I'm sorry if sometimes I have to ask you to stop, but we have limited time and then we have another talk with the photographers. So, Shourideh, please, have you the floor.
Okay, thank you. So my work is mainly in Palestine, but at the moment I teach in Basel. I teach urban studies in Basel. And in the first introductory week with the students, we were looking at states of exception and states of emergency. And I asked all of my students the following question. I said, who here has lived in a state of emergency? And in a classroom of 28 students, where there were mainly either Swiss students or European students, with a handful of students from the Global South, every single person raised their hand. This was in September. Every single person said, I've lived in a state of emergency. And then I said, okay, how many of you have lived in a state of emergency before 11 months ago? And only one person raised their hand. And this was a Palestinian student from the West Bank. So this created the kind of question in my mind. I think to very different extremes, the first months of the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic and the spread of lockdowns, it inverted a lot of our daily binaries, right? It collapsed some of the differences in the expectations that we had in our daily life. Practices that in the past passed by very quickly began to slow down for us. Our lived indoor practices were projected outdoors through mediums like this, through online teaching and online meetings and collaborations. And for some of us, our local context became immediately internationalized with daily cross-continental phone calls and meetings that seemed to become a kind of norm. In one day, you would talk to 3 different countries and 6 different cities at a go. So what the pandemic at the same time enabled was a rise in those differences that we already knew existed, in racialized policing and economic disenfranchisement, in global border controls, through these activations of states of emergency. But I think what was less covered was the way that the pandemic became a kind of settler colonial moment, where settler colonial structures became activated and heightened more than they already were during this pandemic. So I want us to think of the pandemic as a settler colonial moment, and settler colonialism here I use in the same way that people like Patrick Wolf have used it, which is to see it as a structure, right? Settler colonialism is not an event that happens; it's a structure that develops over time and space. And so while there were lines of continuity across all of our spaces, across all the contexts that we're going to present to you today and the context that all of you online come from, there were important dividing lines that set apart these contexts and struggles that in many instances were largely ignored. So before I start to share with you my presentation, I want to put us all on the same page and give you a sense of what the average Gazan person, the kinds of restrictions and isolations that they were dealing with on average, which sets Gaza apart as a space of state violence, as a space of closures, a space of lockdowns and curfews, even from the rest of historic Palestine. As much as the people living in Gaza have made Gaza one of the most beautiful, creative, energetic, and inspiring places in the world, Gaza is undergoing more layers of political and social violence than I think most of us can count. In Gaza, what we have are three various systems of violence that are all enabled and maintained by the illegal Israeli occupation. What we have is a settler colonial structure that places an indigenous population against a dominant settler population, namely Israeli Jews. That settler colonial logic shapes everything that happens between the river and the sea in historic Palestine. That colonial logic comes in the form of apartheid structures, so legal and political structures that are informed by a colonial logic that ensure racist practices entrenched in law. And then that apartheid structure is enforced through a military occupation. That military occupation prevents Palestinians from accessing roads, from moving, from accessing mortgages and scholarships, from building homes where they want, from harvesting their lands. So we have these three layers of violence: coloniality, apartheid mechanisms, and a military occupation. What we have in Gaza is an additional layer of a closure, a siege that has been going on for around 30 years that prevents people in Gaza from moving in and out of the Strip, from accessing health and education and employment, where Israel fully controls, along with assistance from Egypt from the south, the land and the sea borders of Gaza. It fully controls the imports and the exports. And all of these layers today help to create the lived reality of the population in Gaza. And it is this lived reality in which notions of closures, lockdown, states of emergency, and isolation should be read through. So I'm going to share my screen now with you. I hope that you can all see it. And I'm going to go like this. Okay, so I hope you can see it. Do you see it, Roberto? I hope yes. So the talk that we have is under the umbrella of experiments in public space. But when we look at the pandemic in Gaza, I want us to think about it as a pandemic that's under an existing occupation. And to give you a sense of what Gaza is, where it is, Gaza is a coastal area on the west of historic Palestine. It's bordered with Egypt. It's surrounded by Israeli occupation infrastructure, and has three so-called borders on the land and one border belonging to the sea. Gaza's beautiful coast, as you see here along the Mediterranean, shares the sea with many of you in Palermo. And what we have in Gaza is around 2 million people living in a piece of territory, a very small piece of 360 kilometers squared, with land that is increasingly being made unavailable. Gaza is also known as one of the most populated places on Earth. Its peripheries, its corners, are increasingly being encroached upon. So public and open space in a place like Gaza is extremely difficult to find. And whatever public and open space you have is largely in the peripheries, on the lands to its east, which is the agricultural land, and on the lands to its west. Now, as I mentioned, on the east, we have the sea. And the beaches, however polluted they are from illegal Israeli settlements and factories, you may see some of those towers at the end here of the factory pollution. Regardless of this, they are nevertheless places where Gazans congregate, where to feel fresh air, to gather, share stories, have picnics, relax, and catch the sunset and have picnics. So the sea is a major public space that is activated across the various social and economic classes in Gaza. As a public space, however, the sea has also turned into an important area of resistance. In 2018 and 19, every weekday, Gazans would gather along the northern part of its sea border in Beit Lahia, which is one of the towns in the northwestern part of Gaza. And they would protest the closures. They would protest the Israeli military expansion into its borders. And they protest this specific border area that you see, this fence that has been built even into the sea. So Israel is now building borders into the sea, which means that as much as the sea is a public space for recreation, it is also the space where people congregate, gather, and resist. And these spaces, of course, become spaces of community building. I'm going to actually mute myself. They become spaces of community building. It's where people organize, they gather. And what you see are Gazans of all ages and genders showing their resistance to these daily closures. And as much as these protests are creative and obviously unarmed and totally within their legal right and political right to go ahead, they're met with extreme uses of tear gas and live ammunition. And what you see here are just some images or footage that we caught, my colleagues in Palestine and Gaza have caught, colleagues with whom you'll speak, where you see the live ammunition being used in this public space on the beach as a way to try to intimidate, to silence, and to push people away. Another area of Gaza that is increasingly used as public space is the eastern border. So the western border was the sea, which is both as a public space and a space of resistance. And then we have the eastern border. And here too, the space is being mobilized by Palestinians. In 2018, with the 70th anniversary of the Nakba, or the ethnic cleansing campaigns that established the state of Israel and displaced almost 800,000 Palestinians into refugees, what we saw were weekly protests developing. And these weekly protests developed on exactly this agricultural land. This agricultural land is the food security of Gaza. It's one of the only few open places in Gaza along the eastern part. And daily, this area is flattened. It is sprayed by the Israeli army. You see tanks in this space. You see bulldozers that are heavily fortified in this space. And by flattening the space, Israel, being an occupying power, having its obligations in international law for the health and well-being and safety of the Gazan population, what Israel is doing is not only enabling its sort of military visibility from a distance, but it's actively reducing the little public space that remains in the occupied Gaza Strip, while also damaging the food security. Because in a strip that is extremely under closure, where the goods cannot come in and out of the Gaza Strip as easily, this agricultural space is extremely important. Now I'm seeing my screen is freezing, I think, because I have too many open things. Let me reshare my screen. Sorry. I'm going to try to do this again. And so what we saw in Palestine, in Gaza specifically, if it shares, do you see my screen? No? I think I'm having, do you see my screen? One moment. Okay, yeah, we see it now. Great. So what we had here were weekly protests, and what people did is that now that the lands are flattened, now that visibility is enabled, they would set tires on fire to prevent the military from seeing them, and they would march weekly to the border to show their resistance, and they would use this border area as a public space, as a space to gather, to congregate, to resist. They would set up tents along the border area, tents that were named after villages that were destroyed. They would fly kites. You would have processions for prayers. You would have people selling goods. So they became spaces of public congregation as much as they became spaces of resistance. And so you have these incredible sort of open fields where people are completely aware that as much as it is a public space for the production of art and creativity and sharing of ideas, it also becomes a space from which political organizing becomes possible. What we also saw, and here I'm just going to flash through, are very creative ways where people protected themselves using the fruits of the land. They would protect themselves from the tear gas and stun grenades and skunk water that was sprayed against them by the Israeli army. And I mean, I'm just going to flip through these so you can get a sense of how incredibly creative these masks are, but also so you can get a sense of the variety of people who would engage in these protests. But it wasn't only the eastern and the western parts of the strip that people mobilized. The streets in Gaza are also spaces of representation. In the city, the walls themselves become spaces of resistance, and they're used as a way to tell stories of traumas, to tell stories of losses that people have had. They tell you of the landscapes that used to exist, landscapes of oranges and olives, that used to exist in Gaza, but then the more the Israeli tractors came, the more the trees were flattened. They are also used to carry on the stories of displacement that people had experienced. Sorry, folks, I think my program keeps crashing, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if you're still seeing me.
It's okay.
Still see me. Do you still see me, Roberto? Can you still hear me?
We see the picture. I don't know if you have problem to
this one picture. Okay. Well, I mean, I think I can. Maybe I continue talking, and then if it stops sharing, then I can eventually. Yeah. Then I can eventually show you what I have. But basically, when the pandemic arrived, what we realized quickly was that having spent over 7 decades dividing Palestinians into enclaves, Israel already had the infrastructure in place to enable closures and lockdowns and curfews to combat the spread. But those structures were in the end settler colonial structures that they had put in place. And so what Israel was able to do was to continue its settler colonial practices of housing demolitions, bombings, the destruction of agricultural land, even during the pandemic. And what people knew in these closed spaces was that once the pandemic arrives in such a space like Gaza, it's going to proliferate. And that proliferation will be on top of an existing sort of layer of violence that people are already dealing with. And what we saw in Gaza, and I wish that I could show you this, even though my computer doesn't seem to want to cooperate with me, is that, oh, do you still?
I don't know if it is a political action, but Shuri disappeared. Okay, Mom is here.
I am here, but what is she doing?
Okay, I think that Shuri was going to the conclusion, more or less. We will give her the possibility to close. Okay, Shuri.
Sorry, I lost you. But I think what I really wanted to show you was, maybe I'll just go to the place where I left off. But I feel like the bits that I really want to show you are the bits of contemporary Gaza. So you really already get a sense of the way that the various peripheries of Gaza are used. So if I can just share the screen and just show you some of the more contemporary images, you can see how they've been changed. Because I don't know what you heard last. Do you see me now still? I guess you see me now still.
Yes.
But what we realized was that when the pandemic hit, it was another layer of violence that that sort of was added to the existing closures that people in Gaza were facing. And so because Israel had 70 years of settler colonial infrastructure to work with, 70 years of the destruction of public space that it had already conducted, it was very easy for it to add to that layers of violence. And so what we saw was that those living in these closed spaces knew that once the virus would arrive, they would necessarily be at a disadvantage that is incomparable to other populations in the world, because they had already those layers to deal with. And I'm showing you these images so you can see the daily images that Gazans are going through, which might seem very familiar to our own lived realities. People being lined up outside of ATMs, trying to keep a distance, wearing masks, fewer people being on the streets, even seeing the remnants of masks on the street. You see sort of these, kids that are, trained to practice hygiene while still insisting to have a childhood, while still insisting to go out and play. But what we saw in Gaza also was this insistence to use the open spaces. And you have moments like this where now in a city where there is no space, you have the roads that are empty because cars cannot drive. And so kids going on the streets to play football, when the emptied roads and lots are available, are then activating this as a kind of public space. But I think that, so rather than bringing cities like Bethlehem, Haifa, and Ramallah in Palestine in a simplistic way closer to Rome or Palermo, the imposition of lockdowns, curfews, and strict border controls in these spaces show us the key differences in the context. And in the end, and I'm concluding now, Roberto, I know I'm over time, when it comes to looking at public space across the dividing borders, whether it's the absence of public space or the increasing erasure of public space in states of emergency, I think we shouldn't collapse the specificity of these closures, because they also help us understand the tactics of resistance that make sense in the contexts that we discuss. And I just want to end by saying that today, a curfew is starting in Gaza because of the extreme rate of cases that are going on. We have more than 10,000 active cases in Gaza. which is an extreme number for such a small space. And today we have curfews going up where people cannot go out past a certain time, and then taxis cannot drive past a certain time. And what we'll see now are also what we've seen so far, incredibly creative ways that people will have to create new public spaces now under an additionally imposed internal curfew. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry that I went over, and sorry for the technical issues. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shourideh. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, but the time is very short. So we say that at the beginning, when I leave the glass, it means that the time is off. But I try, people will think that I'm a little bit crazy, moving the glass continuously. Okay, Iman, please, have the floor.
Hello. All right, I'm the last person, so I'm at a disadvantage, but I'm also at an advantage because I've had everybody else's paper that I've listened to, and so I will try to make connections with what has preceded me. Shourideh said that public space is being redefined, correct? And when she first told me about this exhibit, it was about public space, and my immediate response was, there is no public space in Egypt for me to speak on this panel on this subject. So, but since I'm here, there are ways in which public space is being defined, redefined, a way in which, and it's being redefined by different forces of people. So it's not public space. What it is something else, and it's being constructed through various means. So hopefully I can show you the ways in which public space has been erased in Egypt. God help me. Can you see my screen yet? No.
Not yet.
So I have to press share screen. Share. Okay, so I have to first of all say thank you for inviting me to this thing, and I'm honored to be a member of this committee, if that is what we are. I have tried to put a presentation together. I hope it will come to meet your satisfaction. Okay, the title is The Mechanics of Art and Resistance in Public Spaces, again, because that is what Shourideh told me this was meant to be about, or from what I understood. So with respect to public space and resistance, these two things are not in question, they are absent in Egypt currently. In addition to public space and art as a form of resistance, this is also absent. So what is public space? How can we define it? I think that's what we're working on as a group. But this is what I think you think when you think of public space and art as a form of resistance in Egypt. This is by Genzir. It's a sticker graffiti that he did under a bridge. It's definitely not there anymore. This is a famous street in Egypt by AUC, where I used to work. And this is currently the state of art that is there. Oh my God, there's a lot of different photographers, but this is Mohammed Aazab, who's responsible for the exhibition that's coming next. So how is the street a site of resistance? That seems to be part of the condition for acts of resistance in Egypt. But public space also needs to be controlled by the people for it to constitute public space. That's what I understood, and that there should be a state of freedom of expression. That is also a requirement, and no police interference. And nothing should be for sale. Right? These appear to me to be the conditions of freedom of expression and art and resistance in public space. What can be for sale, and where there is public space, where there's congregations of people, where there is some kind of expression of something, but not necessarily resistance, is in malls. So this is a few years ago. It's Cairo Festival City. It's a billboard announcing the construction of Cairo Festival City, which, as we all know, has since been constructed. This is for some other mall. This is another mall. There's loads of malls everywhere, basically. This is Cairo Festival City Mall. That's people congregating. These images are from the site. I think I've credited it. So does anyone know Kidzania? Is there a Kidzania anywhere else in the world? I think there's one in Brazil. And then there's, in these areas where there's also IKEA, there are places for cars, like selling showrooms, that's what they're called, showrooms. So these images are from the site, and this is what does not constitute public space for me, because of the way in which it brings people together, but for the site, for the purpose of consumption. So we go back to the January 25th uprising and we say that was a site of resistance. That's when it worked. The conditions were good. There were gatherings of 4,000 people or more in a place, and people were expressing themselves freely. And the number 4,000 I'll talk about later, hopefully, in the exhibition. This is not possible anymore. January 25th, I have no images for January 25th. There is nothing that resembles January 25th in Egypt. What exists instead is an image of the erasure of public art by the state and the replacement of public art with other forms of artistic expression that are produced by the state. So this is a famous image that came up, where this is the nature of the art that is being produced by the state. And this image, while it's funny, isn't representative, right? There's very good images of the huge kind of murals that are placed on the side of, this video is from the military academy. And of course, I can't really stop and take a photograph of it because I'm not allowed to stop. The only way that I can capture these spectacular images for you of art in public spaces in Egypt is with a blurry image of a wall. So what other ways is the public or is the street being occupied? I can't tell you because I'm not allowed to take pictures. We're not allowed to stop and take pictures of these images that I just showed you some of, and there's a no photo sign. Because stopping and public gatherings are forbidden. This is the state by order of the police. There are checkpoints where you do stop or are stopped by authorities, and there are construction sites that cause some kind of delay in traffic or movement. In effect, all we are getting in the street, our experience of the street, are roads, construction sites, and these construction sites are building more roads and more construction sites. At the same time that movement is being controlled and public movement is being controlled, there's the fetishization of movement in the car. Because everything is concerned with building the roads, expanding the city, providing access from one place to another and controlling people's movement. So how do we get from that to making the car a site of resistance? I'm going to pass forward. The only option available to me is to take pictures through the car. I can't get out of the car. I can't stop for no reason. And for that reason, the pedestrian is completely irrelevant. You're either going to be in a car or you are going to be run over by a car because you were trying to cross the road, which is now a highway because it's been expanded. In all of this, what I am seeing is a mechanization of an industry of construction that produces itself. This is how the public space has been occupied in Egypt. And it's for the purposes of giving people access to from one place to another. Either you pay for it in a toll booth or you get stopped at a checkpoint. And so these are some of the images that I managed to collect. That's a bridge being constructed. All right. That's more construction. I don't know how to pause it. Cement mixers. For everything that's visible to you, this is the landscape, or this is the image that's visible to you from the road, everywhere. Not that one with the dog. And so I don't know how much time do I have left. Basically, I can show you two things now. I can show you the ways in which the army has demonstrated and the police have demonstrated their control of space in all its spectacular glory. Or I can show you, and I can show you in 1 minute how people have resisted in two different ways. So out of all of this,
okay.
2
minutes, man.
Okay.
2 minutes.
So this is the army.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is the police, and there seems to be some confusion. So everybody is crazy about the men in this image. And I'm not so crazy about the men in this image as I am about the construction vehicles that appear in the image, and the fetishization of those as a kind of public display of strength and power on the part of the military. The point of view that I see this from is, like I said, from the car, from the point of view of someone who is, the only space I can occupy right now is a car. Here are the two examples of occasions when resistance has occurred, which will indicate to you the conditions for that to happen, show its limits. So this is a wedding in the street. And I have to say the best images are the ones that come with the drone. It really is lovely. I really do wish I could take pictures with the drone, but we're not allowed here. So kudos to Shourideh and kudos to Jens and Sergio for also managing to enact sites of resistance or occasions of resistance through performative acts. And this is the only thing that I can think of that's comparable in Egypt. There was a pyro show. You can see the red spot towards the lower end of the screen. I was at the back. I was the only woman in this wedding. It comprised of 4,000 men just walking in and walking out. It was incredible. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever been to in my life, I have to say. The other occasion was with the kites, and this is number 2, but okay, this was only possible because they had police permission, but the things that were possible in this space definitely constitute freedom of expression. Like within the confines of the police permit, there was expression being expressed, there was freedom being expressed. On this occasion, it seems to be the complete antithesis of all of the mechanics of construction. And in the flying of kites, it's beautiful. Lots of lovely images were taken, not by the kites, which would have been interesting, but of the kites, except this got completely prevented, not just because of winter, but because there were accidents that happened. So the authorities managed to make it illegal to fly a kite with a fine. I'm going to leave it on this image because there are other places and other sites of resistance and the withdrawing of resistance that take place that Mohammed, who is the photographer for the exhibition, will be able to explain to you.
Iman, thank you. Can you go to the conclusion?
That's it.
That's it? Thank you. Thank you so much. I really want to say thanks to all of you. It was very interesting, and I have also to say that for me, it is also a very personal emotion. Now we will have 10 minutes of break, so people can see the photo exhibition on the web, and then we will discuss with the photographers, with the artists that produced this photo. I just need 2 minutes because I am obliged to respect also myself to say something about your presentation, not one by one, but it is sure that managing public space is a political issue at a different level, in a city, in a country, in a region, and at a global level. Pandemic COVID-19 is something that created problems, victims around the world. All the world in some way is living the same problem in this moment. Not all in the same way, because each country has a different reaction and is different possibilities. It is incredible for me that we know by our media, by television, and so on, newspaper, what happens every day in Australia, in New Zealand, but we don't know anything about the situation of COVID in Egypt or in Palestine or in Tunisia or in other places so linked with us. People is always speaking since 20 years about Mediterranean, but only speaking, and speaking, with a very strong rhetoric, but people is not informed anyway about the real situation of the different countries. I think that when we speak about public space, we can discuss at local level, and city by city we have different problems, different reaction of people to organize themselves in the public space, but we have also a regional dimension of the project, and for region I mean the Mediterranean. And I think that, again, we have to put the attention of people about Mediterranean. Mediterranean is not only the place that generate migration or place for a specific war, like in Libya and Syria and so on, but Mediterranean, it is also a place where we have a lot of problems to solve. It is not possible to discuss about Mediterranean and peace in Mediterranean and cooperation between people and states in the Mediterranean without discussing about Palestine. So we have also a global dimension, and we have to understand if in this worldwide problem of the pandemic, the culture, the intelligence, the experience of problems and dramas of the Mediterranean people can help the world in imagining another kind of world. I know that is something that could seem too ambitious, but if we have to speak about this real situation, we have also to think that we can do something. During the presentation, the opening of the art project, we discussed with other people about the idea to create a manifesto at the end of the project, starting from the concept that we have already shared between us. So I invite all of you to think about this possibility and to include in that document a sort of a statement specifically about Mediterranean. Thank you to all of you. We stop for 10 minutes and then we start again with our photographers. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is there anybody out there?
Yes. But I think we're live.
Hey.
Sorry about
Shourideh,
Oh. Okay, welcome. I think that we have online Shourideh, of course, but also Mohammed.
We have Shuru also, who is.
Shourideh?
The others
Mohammed.
are waiting. Jens, Iman, and Sergio are waiting to be allowed in.
Yes, yes. I was speaking about the photographer. So now we can ask them to start. Please, Shourideh, do you want to introduce?
I think we can do that. We'll each introduce our photographers, and then maybe Jens can go first because they can start off the conversation, and then we can go from there. So I'll introduce my photographer, Alle, who is here and who represents Ain Media Gaza. Shuru and Rushdie Al-Sarraj are my best friends in Gaza, comrades, colleagues, collaborators, and Ain Media Gaza is probably the top media production company in Gaza. So all of the spectacular images that you saw from the sky and on the ground were captured by Ain Media. So I'm very happy to have Shuru here to think with us and to talk together about documenting public space in a place like Gaza in relation to Cairo and the Dheisheh camp and Palermo, and sort of some of the restrictions and the difficulties that are involved, both internal and external. Sergio, do you want to?
Thank you, Shourideh, but I think that he had some problem or connection. Is not online in this moment, so we could start with Mohammed Saifi or Mohammed Aazab.
Mohammed Saifi, do you want to start by telling us a bit of your photo? Is Iman or Sergio, are the rest of them on with us? Or is it just the three of us? Okay, Iman is here.
No, they are here.
Okay, everybody's here. And Shuru is not with us. She is. I hope. I don't see Shuru, but I think she'll join again. Maybe we can start Jens and Mohammed Saifi.
Okay. I ask you to be very, very short, so we give the possibility to the photographers to tell something about their photo. Please.
مرحبا محمد فشك اتفضل ممكن بتبلش دقيقة ونص عن الصورة.
اوكي لازم اعمل سكرين شير سكرين
اذا بدك اكيد
اوكي ما عنديش مشكلة. هيك تمام.
لا مش بشوف فوتوز.
اوكي
maybe I screen share. ممكن انا screen share.
اوكي تمام. طيب مرحبا جميعا. أنا اسمي محمد الصيفي، من سكان أنا عمري 24 سنة، من سكان مخيمة دهيشة. مخيمة دهيشة اللي بقع في مدينة السلام، بيت لحم، اللي بقولوا عنها هي مدينة السلام. مخيمة دهيشة نصف كيلومتر مربع، 13,000 نسمة، 60% منها أطفال حسب منظمات حقوق الطفل. بنفس الوقت مخيمة دهيشة فيتا أو هو بتضارب فيتا المساحة مع العام والخاص. احنا في مخيمة دهيشة ما في هو ما في عام وخاص. بلش العام والخاص عندنا من الثمانينات. بلشوا أهل المخيم يحاولوا يلاقوا مساحة لهم من خلال من خلال جدران المخيم. أنا آسف. بلشوا بالثمانينات يحاولوا يصنعوا أو هم يتواصلوا مع سكان المخيم من خلال الجدران، يرسموا وبنفس الوقت يكتبوا ويبعثوا رسائل هي للاحتلال. العام والخاص طلع عنا في المخيم، أو هو شوي نحكي بطريقة أضبط شوي. أنا يوم بعث لي هو صديقي ينز وعمر حميدات إنه هو نشارك أو أنا أعرض صوري في هاي معرض الصور. أنا ما عرفت شو بدي أعرض، وما عرفت أنا شو مفهوم اللاندسكيب ولا الفري سبيس أو هو البابليك سبيس. حاولت من خلال صوري إني أنا أو هو من منظوري الشخصي أنا أبين قديش أنا فاهم اللاندسكيب هذا وقديش هي وجهة نظري منها. أنا بعتبر إنه أرض المخيم هي عبارة عن سجون من خلالها أنا ما بشوف السماء. لهيك أنا بشوف كل السماء عبارة عن سلاك كهرباء كلها. بالعادة هي في أوروبا أنا حسب ما أنا بتصور إن هي سلاك الكهرباء كلها هي تحت الأرض. بس هو من خلال صوري أنا ببين إن هي سلاك الكهرباء كلها هي بالسماء، فهي بتغطي السماء. هو بنفس الوقت أنا مش ممكن ألاقي زمان بدون مكان، وهو كمان في نفس الوقت الزمان هو مرتبط هو بحدث، والحدث اللي عندنا بالمخيمات اللي هو القمع والاضطهاد والقتل والنزوح وكل هاي التفاصيل اللي هي من صنع الاحتلال. أنا بشوف من وجهة نظري اللي هي الشخصية إنه الحل لهاي التفاصيل كلها هو هو ما بيجي من خلال إنه هو يكون معي شوية مصاري أنا وأطلع برا المخيم وأبني دار لإلي أنا وأولادي برا المخيم، ولا هو الحل إنه
محمد لو سمحت لازم لازم مرتجى. إيمان do you want to start؟ مترجم لازم مترجم بالإنجليزي. إيمان؟
Hello, I'm here. All right, can you switch off your thing? Hi. Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, just a second. I was just eating something. I need to get a better sense of the audience. Okay. So we need to repeat this, yes? Because I can ask Mohammed a question and he can answer, but say, I was eating something. I'm very sorry.
That's okay. Did you hear what Mohammed said?
No.
Okay. The issue is that I was also trying to help my colleague Shuru log in, so I also was unable to follow.
Okay, but I think
who can summarize
had this conversation before, haven't you?
I can quickly speak to the story that Fashak shared.
Yes.
So Fashak was summarizing basically the process of him trying to take photos of landscape in Dheisheh. And it started with something very stupid. I asked him to take photos of landscape in Palestine, basically. And he tried to, I mean, there's no word for landscape in Arabic, right? So the very concept of what landscape means for an English-speaking audience, right? Landscape in the sense of that it comes from land and scape, the kind of social construct of land. It doesn't translate into Arabic in that very same sense. So Fashak, Mohammed Saifi, he said, when you asked me to take photos of landscape in Dheisheh in Palestine, I took my camera and I went out from Dheisheh to college where he studies every day for 3 days. But after 3 days, I couldn't find any landscape. I couldn't take photos of this. What do you mean by this? And then this served as an entry point into a discussion in between Mohammed Saifi, as he said, and Omar al-Hamidat, in between how do we translate landscape, that very category which is so obvious to English speakers, into Arabic. And the answer is it cannot be translated, right? Because in Palestine, there are different ontological categories of how we relate to land. So that was the story that Mohammed Saifi started with explaining. I don't know if there's a specific question that we could ask Mohammed, or we could also continue with Mohammed Aazab maybe, and then see if there's a connection to make.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have Mohammed in Cairo speak about his images and see how they connect to Mohammed Saifi's images. Iman, you're on me.
To get kicked, I got kicked out of the room, but I'll introduce Mohammed quickly. What he's going to speak to is a number of photographs that we took on a day that I'm not meant to tell you when they were taken because there is some manufacturing of dates going on. But he's going to speak to 2 of the photographs that were taken, the one of the stadium on the platform and the one of the escalators going up from the platform in another station. So the stadium station, which is the underground, and the one above. These 2 have an explanation behind them that Mohammed will explain. I think the one about construction, that was because of my talk, and the Mu'attam, I suppose. So those are the 3 places where resistance is put into question, presented in a certain way. And I think Mohammed can explain to you better why he wanted those 2 pictures.
يعني بلزم أعيد أنا الصور أو هو بلزم أعيد الشرح كله.
Aazab.
بفكر يعني نحن بنسمع من محمد عذاب وبعدين بنحكي عن الصورة we'll see if there are connections.
تفضل محمد عذاب. Please, Mohammed Aazab. You're on, we can't hear you. Are you on mute? These are the issues that come with the medium.
So I think that there are some problem of connection, and so I want to say thanks to Sandro Scalia. He had some problems; it was not possible to join us. And I'm media from Gaza. I know that their problem was very clear. They have no electricity in this moment, so they cannot stay with us. So I think that we can also leave people watching the photo through the website, and if I don't know if Mohammed Aazab want to say something as he's with us, please, and then we close our conversation. Please, Mohammed.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, I'm Mohammed Aazab. I was working as a photographer, but that was back at 2013. I stopped at 2013. Then I get out the camera like a week ago, so I could take these 6 pictures. Okay, I will do a screen sharing with you. Okay. Okay, can you see? Okay. Can you see the pictures now? Hey?
Yeah.
Okay, you see the pictures now, right?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, this picture is, the first picture is for the bridges and the construction of the bridges now, and how is this related to public space? Because actually, they are now working in Cairo in a new project. This project is actually about converting all the old facilities and important buildings in Cairo to another place called the new capital. So in order to move all the people to the new capital, they turned every single road to a highway with bridges and tunnels and stuff like that. And actually, this construction it changed the environment of any neighborhood. By example, you cannot, if you are living in Heliopolis in Cairo, you were used to something like cross the street and buy something from the grocery or stuff like that. Now it's a highway with no like footbridges or stuff like that. There are very few ones. Actually, now there's a separation in the neighborhoods and in the road because of turning these roads to highways. The next picture is monorail. It's actually it's the same. It's a completion of the project of the underground, but they took it to some more local neighborhoods. So somehow they also changed the environment of all these neighborhoods. Now everything is focused around the metro station or the underground station around it. The police and the traffic police are trying to appear in these areas, which affects how the life around this area was. It totally changed. The next photo is from the underground station, which is the stadium station. One of the most powerful expressions of public space here was the stadium. That was like uncontrolled space. Like fans were going, saying whatever they want, whatever it is about, like political stuff, social stuff, stuff about football, stuff about religion. Anything they want to talk about, they can chant about it and sing about it. And a week and a half ago, there was like the most important football match in Egypt history. Like it was between the two biggest teams in the final of Africa champion. And because of Because of anyway, here in Egypt, the government disallowed the fans to go to stadium anymore after 2011. So there was no audience, there was no fans, but the excuse for the government was COVID-19. And somehow this is how COVID-19 related to our life in Egypt. It gives the government more control over our lives, but actually everything else is still crowded, and actually it doesn't make any sense. They are just limiting us. The next picture is from another metro station or underground station at the same day, and you can see it's fully crowded, and actually this is just a part of the image. It will be like the whole underground was really crowded with a lot of people. So people are living their life. COVID-19 is not affecting, because actually everyone have to go to work, everyone have to go to university, everybody has their business, they following up. But you cannot go to stadium, you cannot express yourself, you cannot have your own public space. Next picture is after the pandemic, and the government put some limitation on when the life stop and when the life start. There was no cafes anymore to sit, and anyone came to Cairo knows that the cafe here or al-qahwa is a culture. Like, this is the escape for everyone to go and sit al-qahwa, have some shisha, stuff like that. But you cannot have this anymore. So it was like all over Cairo, there was scenes of like coffee cars like this ones. And actually, they are varying, like from like the low class neighborhoods have like small cars like this, but in other like rich neighborhoods, they have cars like Jeep or stuff like this. Actually, the people start like gathering around it and start like to have the same principle of the cafe or al-qahwa, but with their own chairs around the car. That was amazing. And the last thing is, this is like a hill we have in Cairo. It's called Al-Muqattam. This hill became really crowded, and everyone wants to go there after COVID-19, especially after COVID-19. It was famous all the way, but actually it's somehow with 25 pounds you can have your freedom with an amazing view. You can play your music, you can drink, you can smoke, you can stay with your girlfriend without anyone asking you what are you doing, which somehow for me was a public space. Thank you. I'm sorry if that was too long, and thank you for everything.
Thank you. Shukran.
Can I add something, Roberto? Just very quickly, that we had a big discussion about how to have our presentation online, and whether to continue online given all the closures of the pandemic. And I'm really glad that we can do it online, because now we can have actually the photographer speak. But for example, Rushdi Sarraj and Shuru Al-Aila, my colleagues from Ain Media and Gaza, are still unable to join because of the electricity cuts in Gaza. And so I think these are also moments that remind us that those closures that existed remain even in this online medium, and that the absences are still there. So I just felt the need to say that, and they are both messaging me that they wish to be able to be with us in this moment.
Thank you, Shuri. I want to say really thanks to all, and a special thanks also to the Gaza photographer, as he was not able to attend. Thanks also to Sandro Scalia, as he had some problems. He was not with us this evening. Okay, we know that we are in a very strange situation in this moment, and we try to do what we can do. What I can suggest is that if each photographer wants to register, to record a brief presentation of the photo, we can include it in the platform so people can see the photo, but also listen the voice of the photographers and have a clear idea of the meanings of the photo that they are looking. So thank you so much. I hope that all people were happy to follow this talk, and I'm sure that this talk was very interesting. So thank you so much, and we stay in touch for continuing our discussion and sharing ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.